No worries.
Hi everybody, today's special guest on GFIS National Solutions Chit Chat is Scott Hastings. Scott, how are you doing all the way up in Edinburgh?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? November. We're into the midst of winter, I suppose, in some respects. Christmas, lockdown, COVID has dominated conversations, undoubtedly. But somehow within all this kind of a little bit of doom and gloom, and I know how tough life has been for some people out there, you've just got to try and latch on to some of the positives and continually just not only reinvent yourself. I'm self-employed, so I've got to be aware of the fact that I've got to find work. I've got to stay relevant. I love my fitness. I love my health, and just stay positive, Graham.
Yeah, I agree, and I've done the same thing. I just posted something today on social media, which we were talking earlier about social media, and it was about the fact that as of Thursday, England goes back down into lockdown, but we do have to find some things to do to keep us interested and to have some fun. And for me, trying to spend some quality time with family. We always moan about the fact that we don't have the opportunity to do that. We can do that now. Spending some time on our own fitness, but also finding things that we just want to change where, we could do a little bit better in life.
Yeah, you're right. I suppose lockdown, when it first came, the one in, the end of March, was very much everything shut down. So everybody was in the same boat. And now that we're in this disruptive phase in Scotland here, we've got 5 phases of lockdown tiers. England are moving out of that tier system into a full lockdown for a month. The uncertainty, the disruption to our lives, where I actually preferred it first time round because it made, we put the brakes on things. And, this time last year, I was in Japan for the Rugby World Cup, working with ITV, commentating in the most fabulous tournament, which is just, it was just over a year ago when South Africa lifted that trophy. And I had 7 weeks over there. Well, 7 weeks was a phenomenal amount of time. And that put stress on, on myself and, my relationship with my kids and also my wife. But, you gradually, got that time back. And I suppose lockdown has given us that time to interact, but also maybe sometimes to peer behind the back of the cracks and realize, hang on a second, I need to do things in the house that I've been meaning to do, doing things for myself. And so that period where we slowed down was a real sort of correction for me, and also a chance to sort of almost reset the compass. And, I'm in self-employed, but I am involved in the media. I do a lot of sports broadcasting. I do some public speaking and hospitality and events. Now, these things aren't exactly firing on all cylinders at the moment, but what I was able to do, Graham, was I redesigned my website, my social media. I looked at my public speaking. I actually did some media training and reviewed where I've been. And whilst I've yet to put perhaps the plan in place, I've already been sort of sowing the seeds of networking, using LinkedIn, using my profile to stay in touch with people in the broadcasting circuit. All on the basis that 2020 is almost, been a write-off. But 2021, how can I make myself more relevant to broadcasters, to the public at large in terms of my sport, rugby? How can I stay relevant? And I used to write a newspaper column for the Times newspaper of Scotland. I don't do that now, but what I do, I continue that discipline by writing a blog and promoting that on social media and posting it on my website. And it's great when you get some feedback and comments saying people really enjoy it. So, like this chat over YouTube, over Zoom at the moment that you post on YouTube, it's kind of staying relevant. And listen, if 10 people get some enjoyment out of it, great. If 1 million people watch this, even better, But the fact is that we're interacting, we're broadcasting our experience, and we'll delve into that, I'm sure, my background in sport and rugby, and of course, having a couple of kids, my daughter Kerry Ann, who you've mentored a little bit as well, and she's represented Scotland at hockey. I represent Scotland and the British and Irish Lions at rugby. And it's lovely to see somebody, my daughter, for example, who has just embraced her sport, and her brother, my son Corey, also played national hockey. And it was great to watch them experience the joys of sport. And it brought back a lot of good memories for me.
Great, and there's a lot of things there, Scott. So thanks very much. That sets my questions up because
that's good.
Earlier, I have a blank sheet of questions here, so we'll see how it goes. But there's a couple of firsts. So This
Yeah,
is the first rugby player that I've had on, so that's
good.
good. We've covered a few of the sports over there. I think 75 people have been on now, so getting rugby involved, and I think we should start with rugby in the Six Nations and your career, so we'll do that. And the second first is, I don't think I've had one of the players that I've worked with dads on the course yet either. So there's
There
another.
you go. There
Um,
you go.
let's start with rugby. So for anybody who's out there who hasn't heard of you, which must be somebody in the world of, maybe Barbados or, Anglia, maybe somewhere remote that hasn't heard of rugby, and Scott Hastings and your brother also, Gavin, as well. So tell us a little bit about your career and how you got involved in rugby.
So I was brought up in a family of 4 boys, and sport was always part of our lives. And if there was a rugby ball in the back garden, one weekend or one day, there'd be a football on the other side of the garden. And when Wimbledon came on, it was tennis. We played in the FA Cup finals. We played cricket in Test series. We played tennis matches at Wimbledon in the back garden. So we were always a kind of boisterous and competitive family. And as we grew up, I think rugby was our kind of number one sport. My father had played rugby. He was a number 8 for a team called Watsonians in Edinburgh. And it just as it happened, my brothers and I all played for that particular club. And your bread and butter is your club, your first club in senior level. And whilst I played through school, it was always the dream, of course. A lot of sportsmen, you'll find that when you interview them, their dream was also to represent their country. And that was no different for me as I was growing up. It was suddenly, you wanted to excel in a sport that you loved, you were passionate about. And I still am passionate to this day about my sport. And what you got to also remember, Graham, is it was very much an amateur sport when I grew up in the 80s and into the 90s. But it was mainly at school here in Edinburgh that brought my passion to the game. And a lot of friends were involved in it. And we used to go out and boot a football around, but we also boot a rugby ball around, and we'd have impromptu games as well. And that kind of that environment of playing other sports, playing cricket, playing golf, doing athletics, cross-country running, keeping fit. It was just something that we always did. But suddenly, that teenager year, you kind of realised rugby was going to be my sport. That was the passion. And I went on in senior rugby to play for my club team, Watsonians. And ultimately, as a 21-year-old, I was capped for my country. That's quite young. And then I had 12 years playing in the international team. So it was a quick start to my rugby career. As I mentioned to you, it was amateur, so I had to build my professional career in terms of advertising, marketing. I used to work for an advertising agency, and build my profile within sport during the old 5 Nations and tours and the like. So that was basically how I got into my rugby and how it stayed with me throughout my career.
Brilliant. There's 2 things I love there. One is you mentioned Wimbledon, and my background being in tennis, I love that. 2, I just posted something recently on sibling rivalry, especially with the Williams sisters between Serena and Venus, and things that drove them to increase their own performance and to be at their optimal level of performance. They needed that sibling rivalry to push them a little bit further. How was that with you?
Yeah, I feel to probably mention, with that sibling rivalry within the brothers was pretty unique. And my eldest brother, Graham, he was a good rugby player and he got selected for Scottish schools. So did my brother, Gavin. And so when I came to my Scottish schools trial, I would pitch up and say, my name's Hastings. Are you the brother of Graham and Gavin? And it kind of, almost the selectors had your card marked immediately. So it got me into the team. I feel sorry for my younger brother, Ewan, who never quite made it, but still got a lot of enjoyment out of the sport. And latterly, it was Gavin and I who went on to be capped for Scotland rather interestingly in January 1986. On the same day, a pair of brothers made their debut. So we motivated each other, but also the environment that I was brought up was we were self-motivated. And I think that remains, even to this day, I do remain very positive and upbeat, and my glass is half full, not half empty. And I take a lot of positive energy from whatever. And I'm sitting here, in the back of the house, I've got beautiful views over the city of Edinburgh, the sun's shining, the autumnal leaves are there, the colours. I take enjoyment, I take inspiration from that. And I suppose being self-motivated in my sport was what's key. So, when I trained and watched other people train and looked at other sports, I learned from that I had to work as hard in those disciplines to get myself and to be a better player. Now, I went on and got 65 caps for my country. And I look back with a tremendous amount of pride having achieved that. But I was never Scotland's best ever rugby player. I was just a player who had a chance, who did the best he could.
I think that's a really good point, and I've talked to a lot of parents over the years with their kids who are playing, and the expectation is you should win every match, you should be the best player on the pitch all of the time. And in reality, in the world of sport, there's a lot of really high-class performance athletes who actually don't win anything. So there's some really unbelievable golfers, by the way, who never win tournaments, and unbelievable tennis players who never win Grand Slams, and unbelievable rugby players who aren't the player of the tournament or the player of the match. And that's okay, though, isn't it? It's okay to be that standard.
Listen. I played for Scotland. We didn't win much. No, listen. I always, one of my passions was seven-a-side rugby. And what I learned within seven-a-side rugby, and even if you watch seven-a-side rugby, players never give up. I still think you can make the best tackle in a game of rugby. You can still you can still score the best try. You can assist somebody in the most perfect bit of play. And that is what drove me forward, to try and find something, even in those jaws of defeat, even those desperate times. Now, don't get me wrong. I have had some very, very painful memories in terms of games that I lost that you expected to win, semi-finals of Rugby World Cups where you're distraught. And yet that's where you accept the fact that you weren't quite good enough. So you reset your compass and you aim for something more. And that's what I suppose drove me on to be a better person, a better player. And suddenly as you grow up from those teenage rebellion years to become a sportsman, I was a bit of a wild guy as well. I was a bit of an idiot. But suddenly you learn from that a little bit, and each year you get older and wiser, and you suddenly improve yourself as a person, as a human being. And rugby has these great moral values in terms of respecting the opposition, respecting the referee, and for me, those values got me through life as well, and being respectful of other people, being tolerant of other people. And yes, don't get me wrong, you could lose it sometimes, and you'd lose your concentration. If you did that, that cost your team. That you lost games because you weren't concentrating. And that team environment, individual responsibility was important in a team environment.
Yeah, and I agree. And as you know, with my background in performance psychology, that's so important. And hopefully we'll get onto that a little bit. There's just a couple of things. You mentioned at 21 there, you playing. And I recently did an interview with a guy called Kieran Brady, who is an ex-Northern Ireland, an ex-Irish international, played for Sunderland Football Club at 21. His career was over. I was in the States at 21, and that's where I blew my shoulder out for the first time.
Yeah.
That was me pretty much done as much as I could possibly play at a high level. It's really tough that we talk about some of the young kids, and hopefully we'll get on to your kids as well later on in the interview. But kids are expecting to just perform at a high level, but they don't necessarily know what's going to be ahead of them sometimes. And, catering for injuries and setbacks and losses. And hopefully we'll talk about emotional intelligence and psychology a little bit as we go forward in terms of how important it is. But I'm curious in terms of, obviously, at your age, when you first started, it was still pretty much a man's game, rugby. And, I've read a lot of stuff about rugby over the years. I'm a huge fan of New Zealand All Blacks. And, that phrase about better people make better All Blacks. I generally have always said, I think better people just make better people. How did you guys find it in terms of understanding the psychology and the emotional intelligence? Because whilst they're modern terms, they were still around. I mean, you were still talking about focus there and concentration. That's all psychology stuff, but not necessarily concentrated on as much as what it is now.
Yeah, but again, we go back to the mid-'80s, and at that point, the nutrition was starting to come into the sport. And of course, rugby players were famed for having a beer after a game and smoking in the change room and everything like that. And gradually, as my career went on, those sort of sort of aspects of the game disappeared, and suddenly people found themselves refueling after games and rehydrating properly, not having alcohol because that was dehydrating, because that knowledge started to come in. And the video analysis of performance started to come in at the national level, and stuff like warming up and warming down. We used to go out and have a game of touch rugby, and at the end of a game, you wouldn't warm down. You just jump in a hot bath and get on with the night, as it were, to celebrate your victories. But gradually, as you got up into the upper echelons of the game, you got exposed more and more to physical training, preparation, nutrition, and that growth period of your learning kind of carried you through the sport, Graham. And now it is I love the top 2 inches of sport. I love the psychology of sport. Looking back to that point in time, we didn't have the psychologists, but we were when I first got involved in the Scotland team, there were some real passionate Scots there who drove the whole machine on performance, on that passion. And I mentioned previously about the British and Irish Lions. Well, back in 1983, there was a Scotland coach by the name of Jim Telfer, very famous coach in World Rugby, who went on to coach the Lions, who coached the Lions to New Zealand in 1983. They lost the Test Series 4-0 against New Zealand All Blacks. And the Scotland players came back and realised that the fellow players that had been on from Wales and Ireland and England, they weren't better players. So they applied themselves. And it's no mistake that in 1984, Scotland won the Rugby Grand Slam. They beat every nation, England, Wales, Ireland and France, won the Grand Slams for only their second time in history. And in 85 and 86 was the time I broke through into the team. And those players generated that atmosphere. And we realized as players that we had to carry on that mantle. And in 1989, another Scotland rugby coach was a guy called Sir Ian McGeechan, who that time was kind of revolutionary in terms of the way he approached the game. And again, we as players realized on the British and Irish Lions tour of 1989 to Australia that we were every good as other fellow players in the other nations. And in 1990, Scotland won its 3rd Grand Slam. 91, semi-final of a Rugby World Cup. And that kind of generated that desire to do well into the 90s, because our learnings from other people and other teams and other coaches allowed us to set a sort of framework in which to excel. And again, remember, this is very much an amateur sport, and we were very self-motivated to do as well as we could when we had the opportunity of putting on an international jersey. So I look back now fondly on those days, and then latterly, as the amateurism of the game disappeared and professionalism came in back in 1995, just before then, we got exposed to psychologists and who used all the visualization techniques. The video analysis guys had come in. So rather than watching an old grainy recording of Rugby Special and playing back on an old video recorder, we would actually have a little bit more content either on a laptop or whatever. But now that's second nature to anybody. They get sent all their information on one of these smartphones, and it's instantaneous. After a game, they're tagged in games and they can analyze. But for us, it was very much a learning experience all the way through.
Yeah, so what we're basically saying is I think we've probably changed the reference point a little bit. And I've just come off a Zoom before I was speaking to you, Scott, with Team GB. And one of the things that I always talk about is reference points and being the best player that you can be. And who is your reference point? So my reference point, my example is that I'm never anywhere near Roger Federer as a reference point. So I can't judge myself against Roger Federer because that would just be embarrassing. But I have to judge myself about my reference point at my current stage right now. And what I'm hearing from you is that at the stage when psychology was coming in, nutrition was coming in, video analysis was coming in, and then you add the passion of Scottish rugby players, all of a sudden there's a new reference point. And there's a new reference point for everybody involved in it. And it takes the players and the team and the culture to the next level.
Yeah. The players certainly had to lead that culture. And in my day, when you got involved in the national team, as I said, I was a 21-year-old. So you step in, and there's all these senior guys who've played 30, 40 games for their country. Well, they're the senior players. And whilst the coaches would provide the framework and the game plan, so the senior players had to lead on the pitch. And the senior players had to bring the junior players along and just guide them through that process. And latterly, I became a senior pro myself, and you started to direct and change that culture. And what I found during professionalism, I had a year or two playing professional rugby, 95 into 96. I only had a year and a half actually, but suddenly coaches started to become the leaders. Coaches and players didn't lead. And I found that whole leadership model kind of changed because there was strength and conditioning coaches, there was attack coaches, and that responsibility of managing the game that I was brought up with. And I still see frailties within the international game where I don't see leadership on the field of play sometimes. I don't see tactics being changed instantaneously because the coach has decreed a certain style of play or what they must do on the field of play at a certain time. And I think the modern coach is the ones who can provide that framework, but allow that freedom of expression, but also in the days of 15-minute half times and allowing water carriers to come on and give it messages, you have to have that flexibility. And it's a game that maybe I don't know enough of. You just mentioned the Six Nations has just finished. I don't know enough about the modern game, although I commentate on it. But when I was in front, I was still a decision maker, and that sort of that culture, we were very much part of it. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure rugby teams, they have great cultures and great leadership. But that's the part of sport that I love, but you don't get exposed to these days.
Yeah, I've worked with a few Premier League football teams where there's been a disconnect between the first team culture and maybe the younger kids coming through. And for some of the younger kids who are making their debut in the first team or getting the chance to go and train with them, that walk across the car park from the training ground to where the first team are training, because of the poor culture, it's been quite disturbing in terms of the effect that it has on their performance. And you're right. And I think we always need to get the individual players to take responsibility for the bigger picture, the holistic picture of what the culture of the club should look like, not necessarily just themselves. And we have gone through that transition, Scott, where we've all been very team orientated to being maybe a little bit selfish and a bit individual, and maybe we're all a little bit fortunate at the moment, and COVID-19's come in and probably kicked us all up the backside a little bit. And hopefully that will allow us to start to think a little bit better about the person next to us on the left and on the right, and how do we help them?
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of ownership, isn't it, in many respects? And the minute you said that, I was thinking of training at Murrayfield when I first sort of got involved in the national squad, and I was part of a B squad. And I looked over to the main international team with all those heroes of mine that were playing for the country. They won the Grand Slam in '84. They were Lions players. And I went, God, will I ever get to there? But when I joined that squad, the senior players would bring you on board. They would coach you. They would teach you. And, as a kid coming out of school, you'd play senior rugby. And there'd be a 30-year-old alongside you as a 17-year-old guiding you in that process. That doesn't happen anymore. In general, if you come out, you're a good rugby player, you're going to be a professional player. And there's a guy who's just recently retired from Scotland. His name is John Barclay. Umpteen caps for Scotland, played for the Clenathy Scarlets, for Glasgow, and wound up his career with Edinburgh. He also captained Scotland. And he got he got contracted straight out of school, and has just had sort of 14 years of professional rugby. There was no connection there from the older player. It was just you're into the deep end, and that's you as a player. And don't get me wrong, he's done bloody well out of it. And Alan Wynne Jones, for example, is a name who became the greatest or the most all-time cap player of all time for Wales last Saturday. 149 caps. It's extraordinary amount of rugby. Can you imagine the amount of team meetings he's been in to get to that? But he still seems to be really motivated, although he didn't have his greatest game in the world on Saturday there, because maybe that emotional toll just drained them a little bit. And so therefore, sport changes all the time. And I just love the fact that, that rugby is that great game where I look at the end of last season, which just recently ended a few weeks, and the Exeter Chiefs became the Premiership champions, and they became the European champions. And that culture that Rob Baxter, the head coach, has created down, in Exeter has been nothing short of miraculous. They've only had 10 years in the top flight, but they've come through the ranks of English rugby, and they've got a brilliant, successful culture and winning model.
Yeah, I have to agree, because that's the world that I work in. But setting good cultures is so vital. And you can have some great players, but if you have a poor culture, it'll eventually come back and bite you. And you also mentioned emotions there as well. And I guess back in the 80s, it probably wasn't a lot of conversations about, Scott, how are you feeling today? How's your emotions? What's going on there? It's slightly different today, isn't it?
It is. And even our coaches, it's probably fair to say the coaches at times, you need a good cop, bad cop. So I mentioned Jim Telfer there, who was just the most brutal of coaches. But he demanded the best out of you. Now, the modern coach will look back and go, well, he was a bully the way he coached. Yeah. He wasn't a bully. He was just getting the best out of you. But he would pick on the weak point. And in modern day, I don't think that culture of coaching would survive. But alongside him was a guy, Ian McGeechan, who went on to coach Scotland for years, and also the British and Irish Lions. And what Geach was able to do was he was able to touch the emotional buttons where Telfer was the drill sergeant. And you needed that spine within your team to allow that process to happen. So in actual fact, the mix was amazing. And, we used to get, our values were very much our emotion of Scotland and the country, etc. And that's what drove us forward. And every team can have that. But it's up to the players now to develop that culture, but to also develop the standards. And you'll know more than anything is that when it's not working and it becomes toxic and it bitchy, and that's difficult to to manage. And thankfully, I'm not in that zone or that area. But there were teams that I played in that weren't successful, but you had to overcome that. You had to get it out. And in our days, we used to get into a team meeting and actually resolve our indifferences and resolve our dislike for things. But we didn't share it in social media. We didn't share it in interviews. And what stayed in the team room was ours. And that's what I say is that my memories of playing for the Lions or being in a Scotland dressing room were personal to me. I don't have a photograph. I don't have a television recording or a fly-on-the-wall documentary crew recording everything that we did, or picking up and instantaneously sharing stuff on social media. You close the door and there was 15 guys representing your country. Those were special, and that's what drove the culture. It wasn't easy all the time, but for me, it was special because it was tangible, it's what you felt, and it's what you loved and played the sport for.
Yeah, the whole thought process about, the stronger type coach coming over as a bully. I just watched the Netflix series, Michael Jordan, I don't know whether you saw it, about the last dance. I've listened to some of the conversations on social media about he bullied some of the players, he bullied the team. Or did he rally the team to win? And it's a fine line, isn't it? And I don't think we can judge what happened in maybe the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to what happens in 2020. They're totally different time periods.
Absolutely.
The education we have now, the understanding we have now is completely different. But on the same side of things, talking about having a camera crew following you around all the time, Twitter's 24/7, Instagram's 24/7. It's a different type of pressure that some of these players have now compared to, what the likes of you had in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, I know, without a doubt. What a marvelous documentary that. I think you're right. Jordan demanded excellence on himself, but he also demanded excellence from his team. He and the old adage, you put in what you can get out, and to a certain extent, hard work does get you there. Players say that, whether they be individual sportsmen, whether they be golfers, and I'm just admiring this guy, Bryson DeChambeau, who's just ripping the game of golf to shreds because he's turned it into a power game and how he hits that thing as hard as he can. He's just posted that he's hit a drive 400 yards. And you kind of go, is it spoiling the game? Well, at my level of the game, it's all about touch and feel and holding putts. But at the end of the day, he was getting up and down and holding putts to win the US Open. Now, he's not going to win every tournament. He's not going to smash it down the middle every time. But, it's always been transformational what he's done. I suppose it's like Dick Fosbury, isn't it, with the Fosbury flop? He transformed high jumping. And you have these moments, these paradigm shifts in sport, which ultimately take the game onto a new level. And, you mentioned earlier on New Zealand, and I've got some great New Zealand mates, and played against the All Blacks, and never beat them. I got close a few times. And but I came across some wonderful individuals, and one of the greatest players of all time was Jonah Lomu, who was just an exceptional character. Became a very good friend. And yet he took the game, rugby union to a new level in '95. And players will continue to, and coaches will continue to change and challenge the game. And excellence within sport has to be admired.
So do you think, and I'm just kind of thinking as we're having this conversation, do you think there's a lot of fear there? So I'm thinking of the Premier League team that I work with where the juniors were really struggling to walk across the car park and be involved, and there's not as much mentoring from the senior players. Do you think we're at a stage now where the stakes are so high that actually those senior players are in fear of their livelihood, their sponsorship deals, their sort of product promotions, their Twitter accounts, their Instagram accounts, their influencer kind of status, because they don't want anybody else to take it. They've got this, they're on such a high pedestal now. Do you think fear's driving them a little bit? Jordan, you were talking about there, the reference point that Michael Jordan sets for himself, he expects everybody to be on the same reference point. Now, because you don't work hard as hard as he does, because you don't have the ability that he does, that's where maybe the bullying and the changing culture as we perceive it now is different to what he went through then.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Fear is all around us at this moment in time, and yes, fear. As I was growing up, fear of failure, fear of, can you sacrifice yourself? And fear is really interesting how you balance yourself, how you use that from a psychological point of view, how you accept it, but also put it to the side, because it has to be fear has to be a motivator. And you're right, one slip, one bad decision, one interception try costs you a game. One missed free throw in a game of basketball costs you a game. So one missed putt allows you to either lift that claret jug as the Open champion, or you come second. And I think that fear is what sometimes drives people on. And Tony McCoy, he ran 4,000 winners. He was interviewed a number of years ago on radio and says, "How do you feel?" He says, "I've lived in the field of failure for so many years, because as a jump jockey, he could be unseated." Now, that was his immediate reaction. You look back to Sir Steve Redgrave. How did he feel when he won that 5th Olympic gold? Exhausted, mentally exhausted. And yet, he achieved his goal, he achieved his dream. But you know what? He can sit back now and look back, because I'm sure it feels a damn sight, better now than it did at that moment. And you sometimes see that of Olympic athletes, where they've achieved their utter success, and yet the lack of satisfaction is tangible almost, isn't it? And it's a really, and also having achieved the greatest goal in life, how do you then rebalance? Well, it's up to you how you rebalance. And listen, I'm not an Olympian. I'm not an Olympic gold. I don't think I won a gold medal in anything. One of them was a 7-a-side rugby medal at the Melrose Sports, which is where the game of 7-a-side rugby was invented in 1883, and I won. I never thought I would win it, but when I did, that was a special moment.
I'm going to go old school with you on that one, because can you remember the movie Cool Runnings?
Yeah.
The phrase in Cool Runnings, which you said, a gold medal is special, but if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. And you're right, is the fact that winning is great, but actually afterwards, it can be really emotionally draining because you've lived in that fear moment for such a long time. And just give you an example at the weekend, I'm a big New England Patriots fan, big NFL fan. I lived in the States for 4 years, and Cam Newton, who took over Tom Brady's job as quarterback this year, he's filling big shoes, but he's a phenomenal quarterback. Last week, he came out and took responsibility for the loss, which I liked. He said, I need to be better. Now, this week, he made a fundamental error in not holding the ball at a vital stage in the fourth quarter. Now, I think he's in a little bit of fear right now. I think he's playing in the fear of, being in Tom Brady's footsteps, playing at the Pats, who are 6-time Super Bowl champions over the last decade, and playing in such a pivotal role. Instead of relaxing and playing to his reference point, in his ability, I think he's almost trying a little bit too hard.
Well, you find that in sports people. They do try too hard. And what you got to do is you have to rely on the processes, not the outcomes, as another great phrase within sport. And it's absolutely right. It's true in life. Rely on the process. We can all get carried away and excited in life. And, I once felt I lost an international, lost a couple of internationals for Scotland, but one in particular was the adrenaline got the better of me. I scored a try. I was celebrating. Wales kicked off. I got myself out of position, missed a tackle. Wales got it immediately back, and that lack of concentration, cost me, cost my team, victory in international rugby, and it's all because of adrenaline, and it's trying to understand that I got myself out of position. But also, if you make a mistake, it's how you make amends. And some people chase games to try and make them end. If you're patient and wait for your chance, it might be a try-saving tackle, an interception, it might be scoring a try. It might be doing the correct thing at the right time in that game. That's all about mental concentration. It's all, and that fear of mistiming that pass or that sometimes we do get guarded. But if you make the right time, give yourself, great sportsmen make great choices in the right moments because they give themselves time. And that's what makes them great sportsmen. And every now and again, we don't get that timing right. And therefore, there's a fine balance to be struck. And that's why sport, you learn from your losses, but you enjoy your wins and successes.
Yeah, I always took a little lesson on my golf game from my dad. He said, if you hit it in the woods and you hit it, in a really bad, take your medicine.
Take your punishment, yeah.
Just get it on the fairway and then take your next shot. And for about 20 years of my life, when I never listened to my dad, because we don't listen to parents, do we? I just took the 3-wood out of the rough and tried to smash it down the fairway.
That's it. And I'm exactly the same. My father's he was a links golfer, a very good golfer, and with the rough is it just take you, but just chop out, go back in, and also keep the ball in play. There's times where I forgo 60, 70 yards, just place it onto the fairway. Then you play up, and you do learn. Listen, I'm a 14 handicap golfer. I love my golf, but sometimes I'm my own worst enemy. I used to get really upset coming back from golf if I played badly, and now I just accept the fact I'm going to hit some good shots, some bad shots, and if I can putt well, that's important as well. Just nail a few putts.
And there's your reference point. So again, you walk around a golf course, and the number of times I've done the same thing, and if I've had a good round or I've had a bad round, it's changed my emotions. And actually, what I started thinking about is whether I play well or I don't play well, I'm not making the PGA Tour next week. So let's just enjoy the moment and the walk and the social of having a bit of chat, and hopefully play to my level.
Yeah. And so you say reference points. I use the phrase anchor point, both in my personal life and within sporting prowess as well. Is that if you use an anchor point, that's really important. You've reached that standard. You've reached that. Right, that was good. Now, if I'm there, how can I get to the next anchor point? How can I just make myself that little bit better? And it's interesting because I played international rugby for 12 years of my life and went on, enjoyed it. And of course, for me, it was a very social game as well. And I enjoyed my touring. But now I'm involved in the sport as a broadcaster. I still take it as seriously as a broadcaster, where I'll prepare and ensure that I get my pronunciations right, my knowledge right. You can't wing it in this game. And for me, the preparation's good, but you can also enjoy it at the same time. And so I do. Preparation is key for me, and just again using visualization. People ask me, how do you remember players' names? Well, I'm not going to remember every single player's name, but visualization. Right, the hooker's throwing in, right? He taps it back to the second row. Who's the scrum half? Where does the left winger come in? And I try and build up a mental picture of where those players are. And I'll practice on that occasion. When I got my break in television way back in, 99, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to turn the volume down and watch a game and try and practice commentary. And I came across this, I use visualization quite a lot in my preparation sport latterly in my career. So I thought, well, why not use the same technique for commentating? And actually it works quite well. And I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed testing myself inside my own head on visualization about how different players might play the game.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of visualization. Use it with a lot of players and a lot of business people who I work with as well. When we get it right, I'm not a fan when we get visualization wrong, because some people really struggle to visualize, to see a static picture, never mind a moving picture.
Yeah,
and that takes a little bit of practice. You need to put the practice in daily in order for you to have clarity of what the vision looks like, and that's where you get your successes.
And I struggle with that, because I use these techniques still to this day. And we used to get our memory palaces and go up, and we used to have our old stuff, our current stuff, and our future stuff. And the way my room was set out in my memory palace, where my edit suite, I couldn't quite see the future. Yeah. I couldn't work it out. Now, whether that was because the time I played rugby, the Rugby World Cup, was it quite achievable? Yes, it probably was, and it was. But I couldn't. I don't know what it was. There was always a mental block about getting this, and talking about creativity with my functional side, my right hand side of the brain, left hand side of the brain. I don't know what was dominating at that point, but I loved that sort of challenge that you could have in terms of prepping for a game. And latterly, I worked with a guy called Dr. Richard Cox, who was a psychologist here in Scotland, worked with the Sports Institute. And he once came in before one of my last games playing for Scotland. He says, well, we don't have a lot to talk about. He says, why not? He says, I've never seen a pre-analysis form before a match day like this. You're so open and honest. I mean, you talked about fear. And yes, I'd have fear, but it's how I used fear to motivate me. It's how I used concern. It was just, we had a lovely chat just about how I would prefer the game. But that comes from 12 years of playing at the top level. And ultimately, that experience for me was different to perhaps somebody who was getting capped for the first time, who was excitable like a young pup and everything like that. And it's encouraging that in that environment, but also realizing there's a team to actually play for as well.
Yeah, I think honesty is a really interesting word, because we use it a lot. We use it in cultures, and everybody who I've always talked to have always said, yeah, I'm an honest person as an individual, but I'm not sure people are honest. I think we hide things because of fear. I think we have a percentage of honesty, but we're scared in case the coach finds out that I'm a little bit nervous or I'm lacking in a bit of confidence, he's going to drop me. And the one thing which I wanted to ask you, especially in the world of rugby, is that we have gone through this change in the game completely, from a psychology point of view, emotional intelligence point of view, from an analysis point of view, from an S&C point of view. The whole game is dramatically changed, and most sports have over the last sort of 15, 20 years. But from a mental health point of view, we always talk about the fact that it's okay to be not okay anymore. And whilst I hear that phrase, I'm not convinced with some of the athletes that I work with, some of the coaches that I work with, that it is really okay to not be okay, because I still feel a lot of people are hiding their honesty, or hiding their mental health, or hiding their anxieties, hiding their low emotional intelligence. I still find that really difficult. That I don't think sports people, they're some of the most vulnerable people that I've ever worked with, but they have the best game faces.
I'd agree with you, and they see it as a weakness. But again, you've been half full man. Show that emotion, show that weakness, because that's part of your own psyche. And I mentioned earlier on, and I'm not saying I'm right in everything, but we had some pretty honest sessions, in a rugby environment with my national team and my colleagues. And one of the ones that I got dropped by Scotland way back in '97, and we had a session where we sat down as an honesty session. We wrote the 3 things that set you apart as a player with 3 other players, and we all told each other what we respect each other, and that built my confidence back up. And one things I could improve upon, not that you're weak on, what are the things you can improve upon? So there are strategies and techniques that you can address these issues. I appreciate that nowadays it's we can live in a very open and damaging atmosphere in terms of social media. You can get pilloried for one mistake in a sports field that's been watched. You can be pilloried by colleagues. There can be a bit of disrespect because you tell them, but those are the cultures you have to address within your team environment. That if you are going to speak about somebody and you hear it secondhand, then that's dealt with in some ways, and because you're always going to have people who will criticize you. Oh, he didn't play well today, but you've got to accept that as an athlete. If you're playing team sport, that's it, and individuals as well. But it's as you said, for some people they feel embarrassed to talk about that, and they may only have that conversation with yourself as in terms of psychology and sport. They might not have that conversation with their coach because they feel as though it'll count against them. Yeah. And you're right. It's hard. It really is hard.
It is not, and I don't think that has changed. I think the terminology and the openness of talking about it has changed, but I'm not sure whether it's actually changed on the ground. I think what's really important in terms of what you just said there, Scott, is that self-efficacy and that self-confidence is hugely vital to performance. And I don't think there's any difference between the world of sport and the world of business. We run a program called the Coaching Boardroom that looks at taking analogies and taking the world of sport and putting in a business sense, because the 2 things go very hand in hand, don't they, in terms of how you perform in your business has to be very similar to how you perform at an optimal state on a tennis court or a rugby pitch or a football pitch.
Oh. The learnings I took from business, from playing international sport into a business environment, which was huge, in that dialogue and sense of communication, values in sport, respect for individuals. It's still out there. And I was having this conversation with a pal of mine the other day who works in the finance industry. The bigger the organization, the more difficult it is, especially if you're trying to change the culture of a business. Sometimes it comes from top down, but in actual fact, it should come from bottom up. And there's a fine balance. And how do you cascade that across thousands of employees and people, and especially now where a lot of our communication in business environments is through Zoom. Yeah. It feels impersonal. We're still having that opportunity, but the beauty of face-to-face communication, being in the same room, is that you can extract far more information. You don't know what's going on beyond the screen. Whereas if you're in a room thrashing out a new strategy or a presentation to a client, I feel as though you can bring out better values within people.
Yeah, I agree. Early in March or April, when I delivered one of the first Zoom sessions I did to a corporation, I was talking about the fact that we will miss the fact that I can smell you and I can touch you and I can feel you. And everyone was laughing, and it wasn't meant to be a joke, because actually we do. We get so much from people in terms of our own emotional connection to them by the smells, the body language, the facial expressions, the change in sitting positions. It gives us so much more information than just the words that come out of our mouths.
No, I totally agree with you. And I did something with Price Cooper's Waterhouse. I've got to be PCW, PwC, and they take in something like 2,000 graduates a year.
Yeah,
and everything's online nowadays, and they have pub nights out, quizzes, the whole lot. But it is different. It is totally different, and I don't know if I would enjoy that environment. But we've got to adapt. We are an adaptable species, and it's how we adapt. And don't get me wrong, not everybody's going to get it right. And I've not got it right, both as a parent, both as a sports person. I'm not going to get it right all the time. And if I make a mistake, I think the best way is just put your hand up and say, I made a mistake. But I need to learn from that. I need to improve my behavior. What can I do for the benefit of my team, my family? Can I listen more? and it's not always going to be perfect, is it?
And that's a very good link, because we should finish off by just talking about both of your kids, not individually, but I have done some work with Kerry Ann over the last 2 years now, and she's doing fab things at Durham University and for Durham University Hockey and for Scotland Hockey as well. So let's take their names out of it. And as a parent who's got 2 kids who are being relatively successful in terms of their reference points in their world of sport right now, if anybody's watching this and they've got kids, any top tips on what you think helps them to succeed in the world of sport?
Let them. Don't live your sporting career through them. Let them develop their own. Pushy parents. I've seen many a pushy parent. Just encourage. That's all we can do. And sometimes they'll take up the baton, sometimes they won't. My son Corey, he started off playing rugby, and he felt he was living very much in my shadow, and everybody knew who he was. And he was a good rugby player, but he used to hate it. And I know physical contact sport is not for every kid, so give kid options. And his option was to play field hockey, and he went on to represent Scotland at 18s. He was involved in the under-21s. He was a very, very good hockey player and athlete. And Kerry Ann would follow him to the end of the earth. And yet it was Kerry Ann who got the Scotland cap, because suddenly she realised within her talent and within her framework, she could actually achieve. And she doubted herself in terms of whether she could perform at international level. I'm talking senior international level. But it was at playing with Scotland under-21s and captaining there and being encouraged by coaches that she could get there. And she 2-3 years ago had to have hip surgery, and she lay on the couch downstairs in the house, not knowing if she could ever walk again, let alone pick up a hockey stick. But what a journey she's done, and I admire her for that, because she worked it out herself. She did. Yes, I encouraged her. Yes, we encouraged our kids to do as well as they could with hard work and dedication. But when suddenly the penny dropped where they could achieve, I think that was great. And sport at that point in people's lives becomes all-encompassing. It's a lovely environment to see them excel, to push, to work hard, to understand, to engage, to communicate, to as you said, to put a framework in place and a reference point in place to say, hey, I can do this. I don't need to question myself. And then once you've done that, you can start to influence. In other words, you have a say on the pitch, you have a say in the way of a game. And it's lovely to see her as a hockey player with Durham University, that total environment of student and yet senior hockey allows her to excel and use those techniques on an international pitch. And now she says she now has a voice, and she's part of leadership groups, and it's lovely to see. And on the other hand, my brother, my nephew, his son, my nephew is Gavin Hastings, who's been playing rugby for Scotland. He's got 22 caps for Scotland. And it's great to see him on the rugby field embracing that. Great to see Kerry Ann. And they have good rivalry between the cousins. And I just love people who excel in sport, who enjoy sport, because sport gave me all my enjoyment in life and gave me a discipline in life. And that's why that's why we all love our sport, and why we've missed it during the pandemic, when it's not there in our lives. And whilst professional and elite sport is going ahead, the people I feel sorry is the social footballer, the hockey player who cannot excel. They can't go down to their local club. There's no outlet. So for me, that's hard for people who play team sports. You can't go and play lacrosse. You can't play netball. You can't play badminton. It's frustrating, but hopefully when it does return, that passion will be ignited again.
Fab. So top tip as a parent, communication is key, but listening is probably more important than talking, and trying to
I'm still trying to learn that. Both my kids would tell, Dad, will you shut up and listen?
Yeah, I've heard that story a few times. Just from Kerry Ann. No, just kidding. One more thing I think we should finish off, Scott, and then thank you very much for your time. But because I'm a little bit over the border right now, we're not too far away from Edinburgh, being in the northeast of England, but how is the New England team after the Six Nations, and how is the Scotland team doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to the England rugby team. Eddie Jones, he took him to the cusp of World Cup glory last year, and They had a tremendous victory over New Zealand in the semi-final, but they froze a little bit in that final. I think they expected too much. Eddie Jones has said himself that he felt he didn't get the build up to that final right, and it just goes to show that not everybody's going to be a winner. And South Africa came through to win that title. He's responded well by winning the Six Nations, an elongated Six Nations, and undoubtedly England play an incredible brand of rugby. They're a very powerful team. They put you under pressure, and they're starting to believe in their own ability. They did everything that they had to do on Saturday there by beating Italy with a bonus point. And at half-time, it was 10 points to 5, and that raised eyebrows. But England were patient, and such was the fractured nature of the season. They'll go on, and they are building slowly to the next Rugby World Cup, which will be 2023. Fully deserved. But England, have shown, over the last few years, 3 titles in 6 years, I think it is that they are, a great team. But the beauty is that rugby every year through its Six Nations continues to throw up surprises. And the team that won last year's championship, Wales, ended up 4th. And of course, Scotland, got a win under Gregor Townsend in Wales, the first time since 2002. So that was a significant achievement. They're starting to build a good culture in there, that they're closing out tough games. They're maybe not the most flamboyant team in the world, but they're a difficult team. And if Scotland can make themselves a difficult team to play against, well, that's good, because every now and again they're going to get the satisfaction of solid wins, but also expansive wins as well, which is what they did a couple of years ago in the Cup game. And last year at Twickenham, it was, I thought, that crazy 38-all draw. They can be a threat. In the right moments, they can be a real threat to any team in world rugby. I feel as though we've never been world beaters, but we've always had it within the culture of Scotland to win at the top level. And it's bringing that consistency of performance, which is what Gregor Townsend is trying to do, as he builds a bigger, more adaptable squad. So difficult times for these players to play in front of empty stadiums, and they talk about self-motivation. It's a fascinating dynamic, which is challenging all of us at the moment.
Yeah, I worked with a Premier League player who, just before they went back into playing, we were talking about this transition of going from 30, 40,000 people in the stadium to 10 people, 20 people, however many's in the stadium currently. And we almost reverted back to, when you start playing the game, there's nobody watching apart from one man and a dog. And if you go back to that mindset and still perform at the level that you're currently at, that's where you need to be in your own headspace, because it is a difficult time. You're used to 30, 40,000 people either chanting your name positively or slagging you off negatively. And all of a sudden there's just nothing. You're just being ghosted a little bit. So it's a change in mindset, but at least we're back to sport a little bit, which has got to be a positive thing for everybody.
Good. Well, listen, Graham, I really enjoyed chatting to you, so thank you very much. It's looking forward to the next one.
Yes. We haven't had anybody on twice, so that'll be great. Scott, what we'll do is we will put your website on underneath as well when it goes out live. And if anybody wants to contact you, that will be fab. But thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak soon.
Not at all, Graham. No, I enjoyed that. Good. Well, good luck editing that one.